Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. So in this painting, I'm going to be working with a new medium to me, which is casein. I've been kind of curious about it just because I thought maybe it would sort of bridge between gouache and oils and maybe be a medium that I would like working with to do plein air. Sometimes it's not always convenient to use oils. It's a lot of stuff to drag along, but anyways, this is going to be all done in casein, so let's see how this goes. I don't actually have the emulsifier that can be used with this paint yet. I just haven't got it. It's probably coming in another week or so, but anyways, I thought we'd start. Even without it, I know you can still thin it a little bit with water and that kind of thing, so we'll use it first without the emulsion and see how that goes. So I'm going to start with some of the darks, just like I would normally, and I'm going to start a little bit more liquidy than I would as I go along. When I paint with oils, I like to gradually get thicker and thicker, and I'm going to do the same thing here with this. We'll see if it works. Who doesn't want to try a new medium, right? It's always fun. I'm interested to see how dry this goes as I use it, but I am going to be spraying this down as I go with just a little mist of water. I've kind of experimented. I was waiting for the white paint to come in, so I couldn't really do much until then. So I've been sort of experimenting and keeping some paint on a palette for a few days to see just how long it would stay wet if I looked at it once in a while and gave it a little extra spraying, and it just didn't completely dry out. So that kind of really piqued my interest even more in this medium. I'm sure if I was working outside, it would be really maybe a little bit more of a challenge to keep it wet, but I've worked with gouache outside, and I think that would be kind of similar that way. So, and again, I just spray it down as I go a little bit, and it seems to work. But I find working with gouache as a medium outside, I don't know, there's something missing. That maybe I'm just really an oil painter, I don't know, but I feel like there's something missing with the gouache. It's a nice medium, and it's great for sketching, but I always find when I'm doing a plein air, I just really miss the oils. So maybe this would be something that would sort of fill in that void a bit. We'll see. Otherwise, I just got one more medium to play with once in a while, and that's okay too. I'm kind of working with the full range of colors that I bought. They're Richardson Shiva casein, so it's the full range. I've actually got golden ochre, yellow ochre, cad yellow, cad orange. Let me see here. I think it's cad red, yeah. kind of red. And there's a deeper red there too. Sorry. Oh, it's a rose, and then burnt sienna, raw umber. There's a green, which is a phthalo green. And then there's ultramarine blue, permanent blue, and Payne's gray, which seems to look more on the blue side than the gray side that I'm familiar with gouache. And then I've got a violet and a black, so pretty big palette, but I thought just because I am playing with it, I'd put all the colors out. If I'm doing a plein air, I probably wouldn't go quite so far into bringing as many colors with me. Just want to put a little white out here. I haven't done that yet. Seeing a little bit of that green in those the birch bark. I don't normally see that, but I do in this picture. Maybe it's just reflecting some of the other greens in the ruby. Sort of altering that color a little bit down the road. I just really want to get the basics in here. Pigments are very strong with this, which is great. I like that. It's and I'm just sort of getting that base color in. What I do love that I've noticed so far with this paint, just playing with it for a couple of days in the palette and stuff, is that it's just so creamy, and that really kind of got me a little excited because it did feel a little different than gouache that way, and kind of felt like a little more full-bodied type of paint, which I tend to, when I work with oils, to work straight out of the tube, so I really like the idea of them being quite thick, and my biggest concern would be that they would dry too fast, but so far what I've seen of them in the studio anyways, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I guess you could always work with a wet palette also, and just putting a little bit of golden ochre into that phthalo green now. I'll mix up those colors a little bit. This isn't going to look like much right away because it's just that base coat that I'm looking to put down here. Hubby was the subject matter for this picture, and we were out at Elbow Falls, and I did a plein air out there, which there's also a video on, and just as we were getting ready to leave, he was sitting there waiting for me. And I took a picture of him, and I just really liked it. I don't want to lose those birches, so I'm just going to go in and just kind of show those a little bit more, just so I know where they are later. I don't usually put the lights in first, but I don't know why I'm doing it different this time. I don't really have rules per se when I paint, but I do have preferences. But then let's leave those alone and we'll come back to those later. I do like the idea that when you layer with these, they won't necessarily pick up the layer that's underneath like gouache does. But at the same time, they seem to stay workable for quite a while. So you can still move the paint a little bit. Catching some of these brights in here. I do tend to like to work from back to front here. But more than anything here, I just want to get a base reading for myself of where the colors are. The highlights and the darks. And remind me when I come in to do more detail, just exactly what I see there. I guess more like color notes right now. The paint does tend to dry a little bit faster on the actual palette. I'm using a porcelain palette with this. I really like how the creamy paint works on that surface, and I wanted something that was going to be a little easier to clean, because I know that if they dry, they're probably a little more difficult to get up, whereas with gouache, you just wipe your palette down like you do with water colors, and you're done. Just using a large brush, just blocking in, just like I do with any painting I start, no matter what medium. Basically just want to cover the white up. Nice thing about a medium that dries is you can layer it, and that's sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing, but we'll see. So far feels very similar to gouache when I'm using it more wet. I actually bought two different packages of color. They had one which was good for underpaintings, and then the other one had a few more of the base colors that I wanted, so I picked up the two of them, and it seems to be giving me quite a variety with those. I think that would be more than enough to be able to create the colors that I want to create. I don't mind mixing some. As far as greens go, there's the one green in the package, and that's perfectly fine. There's enough blues with the three, and then the cad yellow and the ochres to mix up quite a variety, I think. Gonna go with some real kind of hints of yellow there. Just catch that light that I'm seeing coming through there. I should probably let that dry and come back to it after a while, because I would like to layer some more detail in the shapes then. And the pavement there has a sort of a mauvey, sienna-y kind of a color to it, so I mixed the violet and the sienna. There was a little bit of blue on the palette also, and white, and I'll just lay that in where the soil is at the edge of the pathway. That looks a little darker. There's a little bit of that color right at the front there, in the shade of that rock. And then it tends to get a little bit more blue as it comes out towards the kind of a gray blue. We'll add a little bit of that Payne's gray in there. Again, just looking for mostly just the basic tones just to fill that palette right now. That looks like a good gray there. There's sort of a dappling in the ground there, which I'll detail again a little bit more as we go along. But where the light is showing through and it's sort of more of a golden light, I will just leave the white of the paper for now. Definitely some beautiful pigments here in these colors. They're just gorgeous. Now that rock tends to have some very gray looking areas at the front there, where it's in the shade gray blue again, so I'm sort of using that color that I had for that shaly earth on the bottom there. Got some darks in there, a little bit darker. Not too concerned about correct color right now, but Just kind of trying to find that local color a little bit, and we'll be changing that as we go along a little bit as we layer the tones. And that's what really gives it the depth with any medium, is just the layering of multiple tones that you can do. Still working with the big brush here. That shadow underneath there. I want to warm that up just a little bit, adding a little bit of yellow ochre there. Rocks can be kind of fun to do there, because there's no real wrong rock. It's just about creating texture and mixing a little bit of a darker value up here. Just some blue and burnt sienna here. I just want to darken these up a little bit more in this area. Trying to get as close as I can to the value that I'm looking for as soon as possible. Sometimes you'll find that you have to darken a color or lighten it later, but you want to try and get them as close as possible, just so there's a little less going back and forth later on. And I'm gonna go just a little darker with that, with those shadow areas up front here. Some of the shadows actually a little bit lighter, and it's kind of varied. Actually see even a little bit of a violet in there. I'll be really careful with that violet. It's such a strong pigment, but I haven't actually painted with acrylics very much, except the acrylic wash, and so I don't really have too much to compare it to that way. My mediums have just been kind of, like I say, more oil or gouache, and just a little bit of acrylic wash. Which I found does tend to dry quite quickly, but it's I find acrylic wash really fun to do some of the fashion type colors and stuff that when I'm doing, I like to do gesture poses with out of the fashion pages on Pinterest, and so I really like the richness of the colors that they have in that. And the fact that it's a little more forgiving when you can paint over top of something, especially if you're doing faces. Just adding that warmth in there. Strong light on the back there. Let's go in with that warm bit of ochre there. I find myself doing what I do with oils, which is just gradually going thicker and thicker with the paint. Looks like I still have a little blue in my brush there. Wash that out good. Try that again. Might have to come back and lighten that again now. I really like that I can blend a little bit with this paint. It doesn't seem to dry so fast that you can't get a little working time out of it, which I don't know, maybe that's even how acrylic is, but to me it's not something I expected as much as I'm getting is that workability. Let's go a little darker there. That Payne's gray is just a little more blue than I'm used to there. I'm used to being able to use it in the shadows, but it definitely needs to be mixed with something else to get that depth in there. I like, one thing I really like about this casing so far is it seems to have this ability to dry brush, and you can see as I lay this on here how it kind of gives it sort of a textured feel. I really like that. That's something I'll be playing with for sure. It was a little early to be adding texture, so I'm just sort of going back over there. Still want to do a little defining yet in these rocks before I start adding texture. Just couldn't help myself. Like I say, there's no real wrong rock color, but I like the reference picture, and so I am trying to stay fairly close to that coloring. Hubby is definitely my muse when I don't have any other model or picture to work from. Okay, so we got some darks and lights on that rock, so let's leave that alone for a while. I just want to lighten these up. I don't like how blue they went there. I actually like that dry brush effect. Very cool. And that's one of the things that I really like about gouache. Is that ability to dry brush. Keeping the light on the right here. There's a certain amount of blending for sure that you can do before this paint dries too thoroughly. Yeah, the pigments are so strong that you really have to use such small amounts when you're mixing. It's not bad a thing, it's just something to be aware of. I've officially hit the ugly stage of this painting. Just trying not to be too repetitive with my brush strokes, sort of changing it up and turning the brush, still using a large brush at this point. Just getting that coverage that I want on the paper. I am working on 300 GSM watercolor paper for this. But from what I know of Casein, you can work on pretty near anything with it. It's one of the oldest paints there is. So it's definitely gone through its test of time. Just gonna give that a little spraying again, which seems to be doing the trick as far as keeping the palette from drying out. Well, I feel like I've done enough to that background at this point that I can kind of start working on the figure, my hubby. So still working with a large brush here. want to work with that as long as I can. These pants he's wearing are actually kind of a really dark olive color. I'm just trying to match that. I'll be coming in and giving them some texture too, because they're actually sort of a camo. So there's kind of a lot of tones in there. These are motorbike pants, so they've got a little more detail in them. But I don't want to get too caught up in that right now. I have added just a tiny bit of black to that green to give me the depth that I'm looking for there. I'm not going to follow that design of the shirt camo overly precisely. Just want to show the different tones in there, but not exactly how it is. I just don't want to get that surreal with it. I like detail to a certain degree, but there is a point where it just kind of gets annoying. Of that shirt is sort of a blue gray. So let's start with a little Payne's gray. Add a little bit of that mixture that I had for that brownie color, just to gray it down a bit. We'll start with the darks again. There's actually a tree running down there that I kind of like, mainly because it gives me some contrast against that shirt where the highlight hits. So misting down the palette a little here. I just have a little tiny spray bottle that I do that with. And I've got that blue-gray on my palette from the shirt, and I'm just gonna add a little bit more burnt sienna in there, and I just wanna restate some of these shadows around on the ground here, because they're quite dark, and as you go along moving values around, you end up oftentimes redarkening darks, and I don't find it hard to get darks out of this paint at all, which I've read somewhere some comments that to that effect, but I don't find that to be a problem. But that might be because I like to work quite thick with the paint, and I think just like gouache, the more water that you add in it, the more like watercolor it can become. So some of these shadow lines on the rock here. And again, just adding a little more texture now. Again, it's that layering of colors that really gives the depth in the painting. So don't be afraid to go in there and add more depth and again, really love that, the way the paint, when it dries on the brush, enables you to do that dry brushing technique that gouache has. So I'm not following it too much, the rock, but as much as possible, just because I can. And add a little warmth to that. It's a little too white. I'm not ready to go that light yet. I want to save that for closer to the end for the highlights. I tend to like to work all the way around the picture, and worked on the figure for a while there, so it's time to kind of go back and work some other areas, and just so I don't stick too long in one spot, I guess. Okay, let's do those boots. They're a pretty dark boot. Brown, black. I'm actually using a little bit of black. As a rule, I don't use a lot of black, but there are times where black is warranted. And but this is raw umber and black together. Actually, the black that I got from there had a different name than I recall before. I'm just gonna... It is called halftone black. So I noticed that it doesn't have that over jet black kind of feel to it. It's actually quite a soft black, and I like that because that's definitely a color I would use more than actual black. There's times where I have used black and motorbike wheels and things like that where it's just, they are black. And the only way to get that black was actually, though, as far as leather jackets and things, I found that adding blue to the black was really a nicer effect. I tend to use black when I mix it with something else, more than just by itself. Mixing a little Payne's gray with that black now, because I do see a hint of blue in that. And that's oftentimes what happens when black gets light on it. It tends to look blue. Let's brighten up some of those highlights on the ground there. Going in with a little bit of a cooler tone now, but allowing some of that warmth to show through. It was just a little too warm. These paints are quite high chroma, so you definitely have to get used to how to mix them so that things don't get too light on you or too vibrant. going back and restating some of those. I'll have to fix that green where that went over a little too far there. Go back and fix that up a bit later. I like that the hard lines are still softenable, even quite a while after I've painted it. I can go back and just sort of soften the lines just a little. It's a nice attribute of the paint that it's still just that little bit workable. Blending with oils is so easy that you tend to compare everything to that. Well, a little bit of dark in that flask. Let's get that on there. Again, I'm adding a little Payne's gray to that. Just knowing that I can go over colors later when it dries, like acrylic, gives you a certain amount of freedom when you're doing figures, especially because it's a lot of work sometimes getting the skin tone just right, or and one whoopsie and you're done. I find gouache can be really hard to work with for doing figures or portraits at all, because it just isn't very forgiving that way, because you try to change the color and it'll pick up that underlayer and See a little hint of aqua in that, the white of that flask, so just kind of, it's probably picking up the greens that are all around it with this camo and trees that are green and I probably won't be talking too much now as I get into some of the finer details of this. It's kind of like trying to pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time sometimes if you're trying to talk, and so you might notice it speeding up in some areas where I'm just not talking. There's no point in listening to me breathe. Work on these skin tones now. I'm just going to clean off a little corner of my palette. Get rid of all that green. Very easy to clean this, even when it's been on there and it seems relatively dry. It wipes off quite well. That's one of the things I liked about the sound of gouache or casein is it sounded from what people were saying that it stayed very workable for quite a while. And just watching them paint kind of gave me that sense that it would be a medium I would really like to try. For that skin tone, I've used white, cad orange, burnt sienna, and then just a hint of raw umber there to just kind of take that chroma off. You know, if it was a little bit too orangey, and that really worked well. So. I liked the idea that the casein paints would be quite layerable, because sometimes it takes a few different layers of paint to create the right skin tone. It's the mixture that really works. So I've got one of those doesn't have the raw umber in it, so it's the titanium white, cad orange, and burnt sienna, and you'll have to sort of play around with the amounts of those that you put in. But the one, and then there's the one with the raw umber, which is down here, which is just a little a little less warm. In fact, I think I'm going to use that one up here also. Just take some of the redness out of that color. And I see that color also in a small picture like this. You don't want to over complicate the colors, so I'm using kind of a local color, which I'm putting in wherever I see it, and then I'll go back in and find a few darks and lights just to highlight it. But you don't want to overwork this and try to get too complex with the colors on something that's so small. It'll just look odd. So in that first one, which is the cat orange, white, and burnt sienna, I'm going to add just a little bit more white to that to go into those lighter areas. That's where I see them here. Use that lighter one on the end there, where the sun is catching. I need to put those glasses in. It seems like a weird thing to do, but I need them there for the values on the face to see where I'm at. I've just mixed up some burnt sienna and some raw umber here. They're actually looking quite warm in the picture there. Maybe that will a little bit warmer. And then I can cut into those, which is a little easier to get that shape right. That way. Now the great thing about Casein is that it will dry, and if I don't like some of the shapes, I can come in after it dries and adjust those. So to me, that would make it, especially where I just blooped that color, make it a lot more workable for this type of a painting because it's correctable. Especially when you do a little bloop like I just did right there. I'm going to just take a little Q-tip there and get the moisture out of that, and I will come back later and kind of make those shapes a little stronger, I think. Or not. While I've got that little bit of color from the glasses, I'm just going to add it to the skin tone and just put that ear in here. It's actually a little pinker than that, so we'll just add a little bit of that cad red in there. And we'll come back and add some little bit of white in there after. I've got that little bit of cad red now in that color, and I'm just darkening that area under the chin. My husband has a goatee, so what I'm mixing here is just a tiny bit of raw umber, and I'm going to go a little darker on that goatee right away, just so that I got something to lighten. If I want to lighten it, maybe we'll just leave him a little less gray. Let's add just a little bit of that red in with that burnt umber. This is the rose I'm adding in there. I need a color that's going to give me a little bit of readiness around that nose there. And a little bit of a line on that side. We'll give a little line in here. Warm that up in there. And that is very workable for any medium. It's quite nice. A bit of shadow on this side here. I want to let's give my husband some lips here. I'm not going to overstate them here, just a quick line here, just a little bit of a lighter tone there on that ear. Looks a little too red there. Go in with a little white and burnt sienna. And there we go. Let's redefine some of those greens behind. I'm deliberately putting that dark in there. I do see it in the picture also, but because it frames the face, and it just gives it a little more pop. If you put some dark behind there, it'll Grab a different brush now. I don't want to make the same marks. This brush is a little smaller. A little bit of birdseed in that mix there. It doesn't hurt anything, just kind of adds another dimension. I've just got this real puddle of greens and now that I'm working into. Some of these darks in behind this rock just to make it pop forward a little bit. Not being afraid to cover over some of those trunks that we have in there. It's more natural. Trying to keep my marks different and varied just for visual interest there. there's a few in here that are just really catching the light. Adding a little bit of white now to some of these yellow bits where the sun is really bleaching them out. And just the more tones of green, just the richer the environment looks. It's restating some of these lights and the shadows there. Kind of a dappled lighting. A little bit of dry brushing. Just the more texture, the better in that foreground. The dry brushing really kind of gives it sort of a pebbly feel. Of course, you can go in there and do some splashing just like you can with watercolor at this point. Let's see if I can do that without making a mess of things. Looking for a good stiff brush here. And I just like to put in the water, mix it into a muddy color, and then splash. I find it works the best if it's fairly wet. Not worrying about it too much if it dribbles or anything. It just sort of seems to add to the texture. That's a little too dribbly, that one. And we'll let that dry and sort of go back in there and touch that up a little. I just want to right now kind of clean up some of the edges that I have around the rocks and where there's just some whites showing through.